Take our Bibles and go to Hosea chapter number 4. We are here in the middle of a study on the book of Hosea. And you've already heard what I think about some of the stuff going on in Hosea. Man, it's powerful, it's strong. There's some amazing pictures and types of Christ going on here in the book of Hosea, and I'm genuinely enjoying our study. But just by way of review, let's back up. Hosea is a book that is written by inspiration of the Spirit through the prophet of God, and it is to the nation of Israel. And this is prior to northern Israel being attacked and conquered by the empire of Assyria, who is going to be coming in and doing this. But there's a reason that God is going to allow Assyria to come in and conquer northern Israel, and that is because of their idolatry. They had turned their hearts against God, they were rebellious against God, and are in the midst of idolatry. And so God is now giving a warning to both northern Israel, but also to Judah, southern Israel. Specifically here in chapter number 4, we see this warning that is given to southern Israel. And we'll take a more close look at that here in just a little bit. Chapters 1 through 3 of the book of Hosea are about Hosea's family life. And of course, it is here that we really see the parallels that are going on in Hosea. We have the first parallel, which is Hosea and his wife Gomer. And Hosea is told in chapter 1 to go and marry a wife of whoredoms, a wife who is going to leave him and go after other men. And so Hosea does that, and sure enough, that's what happens. We have that first parallel of Hosea and his wife Gomer and their children, the 3 children named there, all of which have names with very specific meanings dealing with Israel. And if you don't remember that, go back to, in this series, back to chapter 1, and you can learn more about that. But I carry on here. We have the second parallel. As we read throughout this whole book, we also see God the Father, which is like Hosea, and the nation of Israel, which is like Gomer. And so God is using this illustration of Hosea's marriage to also illustrate, this is what you have done, Israel. This is how you have turned your back and went after other gods, leaving me behind. And so in chapter 2, we saw how God was trying to bring about restoration with Israel, and how Hosea was trying to bring about restoration with Gomer. And so we had the 3 therefores that were mentioned in chapter number 2. And verse 6 is the first therefore, where he says, therefore a hedge of thorns will be placed round about you. Why? It is so that it is harder for you to leave. It's harder for you to stray off into sin. It's going to slow you down. It is going to cause some kind of pain for you to head off into sin. But the hedge of thorns didn't stop Gomer, and it didn't stop Israel. We got to the second therefore in verse number 9, where he is going to begin to withhold his blessings and his provisions. Hosea, remember, he had been providing food and wine and clothing and all this stuff and money for his wife, even when she had been living with other men. And so he tells Hosea to withhold those things now. And so God begins to withhold his blessings and his provisions from the nation of Israel, to try to get them to turn, to try to get them to repent, and to understand where they were, what was going on. They had offended God, or transgressed God, I should say. But it didn't work in either case. Which brought us to the third therefore in chapter number 2, which is in verse number 14, talking about the valley of Achor, the valley of trouble. Now that you have gone through the hedge of thorns and I've withheld all of my blessings and my provisions, you're going to find yourself now at the lowest of the low. You're going to find yourself living on the street. You're going to find yourself with no hope left. You're going to find yourself with nobody left to take care for you, to watch over you, to love you, and you're going to find a hopeless place in your life where you will then find the theme of chapter 2, which is the door of hope. You will find the door of hope in that place. And that door of hope, as we well know, is Jesus Christ. Because remember I said, there are actually 3 parallels that we are looking at in the book of Hosea. There is Hosea and Gomer, God the Father, and Israel, but there is also God and the Christian. Because we are not Israel and we are not God, nor are we Gomer or Hosea, as we go and study through this book, we need to come away with something. And so we have to also look at my relationship as it relates to God. Am I living a life that is in rebellion to God? And we've talked about this. Is it possible for me to live a life in rebellion to God while attending church? While wearing the right things, while doing the right things, it seems like anyways on the outside? Yes, we can absolutely put up that front and appear like we are right before God. Meanwhile, living in rebellion to God in our hearts and in much of the rest of our lives. So chapter 2 dealt with God trying to bring reconciliation. Then we got to chapter number 3. After they found the door of hope, there in the valley of Achor, we see in chapter 3 a future event. Now, obviously, let me back up. We see a future event for the nation of Israel, talking about the redemption of Israel. We also understand it as a past event because it's also talking about Jesus Christ coming. But let's just again briefly look at chapter number 3. He tells Hosea to go and find his wife there at the slave market, and so he does, and he purchases her or redeems her back for half the price of his normal slave. Nobody else wanted her, but her husband did because he loved her. And so he purchased her back and brought her back. And he made a covenant with her once more. Made a covenant with her that now you are going to be only mine once again. They'd already made this covenant once before when they got married, but she had broken it. And he says, you will be only mine from this point on, and I will be only yours. She did not deserve that promise from him after the way she'd lived. But yet he still was gracious enough to offer to her. Boy, do we not see in chapter 3, which is only 5 verses long, an amazing picture of the redemption that Jesus Christ bought for us on that cross when he purchased us back, even though we were not even in the least worthy of it. As he went to the slave market and purchased us back. Chapter 3 was wonderful, but I must move on so I don't end up preaching the same sermon again. Then we got into chapter number 4. Chapter number 4 here. Did I open up the right one? I opened up chapter 5. So hold on to that. I wasn't thinking correctly. So I have to finish chapter 4 before I can get into chapter number 5. In chapter 4 here, we were looking specifically at idolatry as the problem. What has brought God's disdain and wrath down upon Israel? It was idolatry. I made the statement here 2 Wednesday nights in a row about this as well, that immorality is always preceded by idolatry. In other words, my first foray into sin isn't always just going out and committing physical immorality. It starts when first I put something or someone else on my throne of my heart other than God. I begin to put somebody else in his place. I get my priorities out of whack, and I begin to have idols. No, not the gold, silver, and wooden kind per se. Oh, it can be gold, the kind you put in your safe. It can be silver, the kind you polish and put on your table. Sure, it can be wood, yeah. It can be, steel that you drove it on the way here. It can be the zeros in your bank account. And more than often, it is our very own flesh that becomes our idol. It can become our children that become our idols. And we sacrifice everything upon the altar of giving them what they want. But more often than not, we sacrifice everything and everyone else for our own pleasures. Israel had a problem with idolatry. And that is what chapter number 4 is dealing with. First of all, he began to talk about the problem there in the land of Israel. He also talked about the wickedness of the people of Israel. And if you recall last Wednesday evening for point number 2, there was a picture there of Israel bowing down to this false idol. And they were bowing down to this false idol, and it was up inside a grove of trees. And chapter number 4 talks about that. In fact, look in Hosea chapter 4, and we'll just begin at the beginning of the chapter and read up to where I finished last Wednesday evening. We got up through verse number 12. So look at Hosea 4, beginning in verse number 1. It says this, "Hear the word of the Lord, ye children of Israel, for the Lord hath a controversy with the inhabitants of the land." We talked about, why does he talk here about the inhabitants of the land? Why does he talk about the land at all and not the people? Well, he is talking about the people. Go back to a couple weeks ago or last week when I dealt with that. Verse number 2, "By swearing and lying and killing and stealing and committing adultery, they break out. And blood toucheth blood." In other words, one crime is not finished before another one begins. One murder is not over before the next one begins. Verse 3, "Therefore shall the land mourn, and every one that dwelleth therein languish, with the beasts of the field and with the fowls of heaven, yea, the fishes of the sea also shall be taken away. Yet let no man strive, nor reprove another. For thy people are as they that strive with the priest." And we went to the book of Deuteronomy last Wednesday evening, and we talked about what God's plan was for when there was a civil problem that went further than what they were able to deal with. They were to take those civil issues to the priests there in the temple, in the tabernacle. Take those civil issues to them and let these godly men, who are supposed to be godly anyways, let them, through the power of the Holy Spirit, deal with discerning in these matters. That's what they were supposed to do. And if you did not listen, or let me put it this way, if you did not follow through with what their judgment was, then you would be killed. Now, we back up. I was just reading here in Hosea 4, verse number 4, it says, "Yet let no man strive, nor reprove another, for thy people are as they that strive with the priest." That can be a difficult phrase to understand what they mean. For thy people are they that strive with it. Who's fighting with the priest? It's the ones who, when the priests say, "This is the right thing to do. You guys are off in the moral wrong, in the ethical wrong. This is the right thing to do." And then here they stand with their fists up arguing with the priest. "No, you're wrong. You don't understand. I don't want to hear any of that Bible nonsense from you. What do you mean, the morality of God? Come on. That's old-fashioned. Nobody thinks that way anymore." And they're literally standing there arguing with the man of God about what is right and what is wrong, given by the very word of God to them in many cases, and other times through the moving of the Holy Spirit in them. He says, don't strive or reprove. He says in verse number 5, "Therefore shalt thou fall in the day, and the prophet also shall fall with thee in the night, and I will destroy thy mother." My people, and we see here in verse number 6 some important things. We see knowledge of God, and we saw also in here in verse number 1, he says there's no truth, no mercy, no knowledge of God in the land. What is the problem? Where did it begin with Israel? We saw back in verse number 1, no truth, no mercy, no knowledge of God. Now we go back again to verse number 6, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." Lack of scientific knowledge, historical knowledge, lack of financial knowledge. Lack of what kind of knowledge? Military knowledge. That's it, right, isn't it? Because if only Samaria, the capital of northern Israel, if only they had a greater military, more powerful, if only their siege engines were better, right, or their navy was stronger, then certainly they would be able to withstand the coming attack of Assyria. No. It didn't matter how great or powerful or knowledgeable their military would be. If God was going to give Assyria the victory over his people could do nothing to stop it. What were they lacking in knowledge? A knowledge of God. He says, "Because thou hast rejected knowledge, I will also reject thee." Again, what knowledge? Back in verse number 1. "Nor knowledge of God in the land." There is no knowledge of God in the land. America is a strong, militarily, in every way. We're the strongest nation in the world. But we are also probably one of the proudest nations in the world. Which is a very, very dangerous combination. And while right now we think to ourselves, right now, F-22s could be dropping bombs over in Iran for all we know right now, or B-2s could be dropping bombs in Iran right now. But no matter how strong or untouchable we think we are, how untouchable our generals or even our president thinks we are. If we remove God from our knowledge, we remove him from our armory. He goes on to say in verse number 6, I will reject thee, that thou shalt be no priest to me. Seeing thou hast forgotten the law of thy God, I will also forget thy children. Man, forget thy children, destroy thy mother in verse number 5. Verse number 7, as they were increased, so they sinned against me. As they grew in numbers, as they prospered financially and economically, as their military and their defense industry grew, what did he say in verse 7? So they sinned against me. So their sin and their transgression also increased. I'm going to draw a lot on this third parallel this evening, which is us and God. And you cannot help but recognize this evening this idea that, of course, the United States has increased and prospered in many, many ways. But along the way, our transgressions against God have also increased. And if God would not spare his own nation and his own people, Israel, why on earth would he spare the United States of America? Some might say, well, we need it. We're needed here. We're the policemen of the world. What would Russia or China do if we weren't around? God does not need us. He doesn't need us at all. I talked about Sennacherib's army on Sunday. He didn't need an army to destroy Sennacherib's army. He didn't need archers or siege engines. He did not even need a plague or rats, as the Ethiopians claimed. Ethiopian historians wrote that it was rats that brought in the plague to Sennacherib's army and killed a bunch of them. Somehow all in one night. I don't know. God does not need those. I don't need a scientific explanation to explain to me what happened to Sennacherib's army. And he doesn't need America either. We go on, it says, as they were increased in verse number 7, so they sinned against me. Therefore will I change their glory into shame. They eat up the sin of my people. Here we're talking about the priests. They eat up the sin of my people, and they set their heart on their iniquity. And there shall be, like people, like priest. And I will punish them for their ways and reward them their doings. The priests are their religious leaders. And as the people transgressed and went into sin, it was up to the priests and to the Levites to put a stop to what was going on. To stand up and say, this is absolutely wrong. Those groves up there on the mountaintops where you're worshiping your false gods need to be broken down into pieces. Those trees need to be hewn down, and it all needs to be burned, much like Gideon did to his own father's grove and idols. And one night he and some men went and just tore all that stuff down, and his dad was not happy. The priests, it was their job to stand up and say, no, this is truth. What you're doing is wrong, but that's not what they got. What Israel got were priests who just simply told them what they wanted to hear. And that's what he means in verse number 8. They eat up the sin of my people, and they set their heart on their iniquity, and there shall be like people, like priest. And I will punish them for their ways and reward them for their doings. For they shall eat and not have enough, and they shall commit whoredom and shall not increase, because they have left off to take heed to the Lord. Whoredom and wine and new wine take away the heart. And we talked about this last Wednesday evening as well. That when we head off into sin, seeking some sort of satisfaction, we will never, ever, ever, ever actually achieve that satisfaction, but we will always be left hungrier than we were before, seeking greater amounts than we were ever able to capture before, and we will always just be wanting. And it will draw away and take away our hearts. Now we get up to verse number 12, where it says this, "My people ask counsel at their stalks, and their staff declareth unto them. For the spirit of whoredoms hath caused them to err, and they have gone a-whoring from under their God." We talked about the spirit of whoredom last Wednesday evening as well. It is a spiritual warfare we're talking about. I won't belabor that point, but I again remind you, Christian, this of what it says in 1 John 4:4, where he says, "Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world." We have no excuse to be toppled by spiritual warfare in our own lives. It will inevitably come, but greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. And now we get to verse number 13. I'm going to try to get through the rest of this chapter so I can get to chapter 5 this evening, but it's not looking very promising now. Look at verse number 13. It says, "They sacrifice," this is Israel, "they sacrifice upon the tops of the mountains and burn incense upon the hills, under oaks and poplars and elms, because the shadow thereof is good. Therefore your daughters shall commit whoredom, and your spouses shall commit adultery." Can you imagine people who once worshiped the true and living God? Now they're out under the trees. Why? Because the trees shade them from the sun? It's not the shade they're concerned with. It's hiding what they're doing. Hiding the shame of what they're doing. Now they're out under the trees having their own worship services to whatever graven image in God they recently found. To whatever is the most fashionable god of the day. They're out there. Have you heard of people with things in their own home that they look to for strength and worship? Maybe they have their own little garden of gods, their own little, the right word does not come to my mind right now, but they have their own little idols and their candles and incense and pictures and images, and they keep these little altars in their home. And it's not quite so common. It's not really an American thing, but often you'd find those in a Middle Eastern home, especially a Buddhist or a Hindu's home. But nevertheless, you'll find them in homes. And sometimes maybe it's not quite like that. Maybe the altar that the family worships behind is sitting on top of the entertainment center, or is attached to the wall, and it never turns off. It never goes out. I'm not saying that you cannot have a TV or video games or any of those things. Of course not. But does it control you, or do you control it? Who worships who in that home? We've become a garden of gods in America. Verse number 14 says, "I will not punish your daughters when they commit whoredom, nor your spouses when they commit adultery." Let's stop and think about what he's saying here. In verse 13, he says, "Therefore your daughters shall commit whoredom, and your spouses shall commit adultery." This was a part of heathen worship in so many ways. But this isn't just worshiping false gods and the prostitution that goes on in their worshiping. But this is just the pervasion of wickedness in all of society that is going to occur when we leave God to the side and His Word and His morality and rules to the side and decide, I'm going to follow after whatever I want. I want these gods, I want those gods, I don't want any gods. Whatever the case is, I'm going to do whatever I want. And that then becomes a perverse, filled society. And so your daughters, your spouses, they're going to go do these things. But then it says in verse 14, "I will not punish your daughters when they commit whoredom, nor your spouses when they commit adultery. For themselves are separated with whores, and they sacrifice with harlots. Therefore the people that doth not understand shall fall." Remember how back in chapter number 2, God tried to slow them down with the hedge of thorns. He removed His provisions and His blessings, trying to get them to turn around and see why it went missing. But none of those things happened. And then they ended up in the valley of Achor. God's not doing anything now. He's just watching and waiting for them to ultimately fall into their own troubles and then begin looking for the door of hope. And here he's talking about that very same thing now. They've gone far enough that I'm not going to slow them down anymore. No more speed bumps, no more stop signs. You guys just head off into your wickedness as fast and as foolhardy as you want to. I'm not going to say anything more. And I hope that at some point in the future, something happens. Maybe you fall down flat on your face, because usually that's what's necessary. Maybe you get to the very bottom of the barrel. You come to the very end of yourself, completely hopeless. Then you can find that door of hope in the valley of Achor, the valley of trouble. No, I will not punish your daughters. I will not deal with them anymore. I'm not going to discipline them anymore. I have given them over to their ways. In verse number 15, he says, though thou, Israel, play the harlot, yet let not Judah offend. And come not ye unto Gilgal, neither go ye up to Bethaven, nor swear, the Lord liveth. What's he talking about? Again, he says, Israel playeth the harlot. We know what that is. Yet let not Judah offend. When he says Israel, he's talking about northern Israel. Again, I remind you, in the same chapter, he talks about Ephraim, and Ephraim here is one of the 10 tribes of northern Israel, but the most prominent tribe. So when he's talking about Ephraim, and he's warning Judah to not be like Ephraim, he's talking about all of northern Israel. And here he gives that additional warning in the verse that I just read, yet let not Judah offend. Again, I remind you, Assyria's coming. And they are going to sweep over northern Israel and destroy them. They are going to take northern Israel captive, and they're going to scatter the people of northern Israel all across that empire. They're going to come down into southern Israel, and they're going to take city after city after city after city, but they're going to come up to the walls of Jerusalem, and God is not going to allow them to take Jerusalem. King Hezekiah is going to pray. He's going to bring it before God, and God is going to prevent Sennacherib and the Assyrian army from overcoming the city, the capital of Jerusalem, and King Hezekiah. And Sennacherib, without his army, is going to tuck tail and have to go all the way back to not to Babylon, but to the capital of Assyria. Judah, pay attention. Don't make the mistakes they're making. I had a benefit of being the third child, of being the youngest. And so I could watch what my brother did and what my sister did. And I could hear mom and dad's conversations about them. Maybe you were in a position as well where you could hear mom and dad's conversations about your siblings and well, this is things they shouldn't have done, or this is things that mom and dad were displeased with. And so I got to be a part, somewhat of being able to hear those things because I was so far behind in age from them. So I had the benefit of hearing mom and dad's mind concerning those things. You see what they're doing? Don't do that. I do the same thing with my children sometimes. Not that I want to make them look down on anybody else, but listen, you see how that person is behaving. Sometimes it's an adult, like, okay, you see this video of this person, this protester, acting completely ridiculous. You see what they're doing? We don't behave this way. We are not going to call people's names. We're not going to throw things at people. We're not going to behave in such a way. Even my children know not to behave in such a way, which many adults in our society have not yet learned to grasp that concept. And he says, Judah, watch what happens with Israel. It's coming. You see what they're doing now, and you seem to think they're prospering. There's nothing happening to them. God must not care, or there must not be a God. This whole worshiping and bringing your sacrifices to the temple thing, no big deal, right? Well, that's not what God says. He says, it looks like they're doing fine now, but Assyria will be coming. Watch what happens to them, and you do better. Again, I remind you of this too. That when the nation of Israel split into two, because Solomon, he dies, his son Rehoboam becomes king, but he was not a good king. He was not wise like his father. And so because of his cruelness and his wickedness, northern Israel decides to split and take their own king, Jerusalem. I'm sorry, Jeroboam. I can do this. Take their own king, Jeroboam. Jeroboam thought to himself, well, you know what? I don't want them going down, and we'll talk about this when we get to chapter 5 more, because it talks more about this. But because it mentioned Gilgal and Bethaven, I went ahead and bring it up now. Jeroboam did not want his people in northern Israel going to Jerusalem in southern Israel to worship at the temple. And so to prevent them from doing that, he gave them their own gods to worship, golden calves. These are your gods now, he says. And come here to one. He put one in Gilgal, put one in, I don't think it was Bethaven. I'll get to it next week in chapter 5. But he says, here are your two gods. Here are two places you can go and worship now. You don't need to go to Jerusalem anymore. If they got away with that, then southern Israel would have said, I can worship however I want. Look, they're prospering. And so God brings now judgment down upon northern Israel. Look at verse number 16. Verse number 16, it says, for Israel slideth back as a backsliding heifer. Now the Lord will feed them as a lamb in a large place. You try to move a cow somewhere it doesn't want to go. Can you? Not unless you have a tractor, and you have the cow chained to the tractor, which probably is not a good practice. You're going to end up injuring the cow. But if that cow doesn't want to go that direction, you're not going to make it go that direction. I mean, I've seen cows withstand a whip. I've seen them withstand a goad, and those electric ones, if they don't want to go that direction, they're not going to go that direction. You have to try hard to coax them into going where you want them to go. This is the image he's trying to give us here in verse number 16. Israel slideth back as a backsliding heifer. I'm trying to get you to go in this direction, and you're backing out saying, no, no, no. I will not obey. I will not do as I'm told. Then he goes on to say this, now the Lord will feed them as a lamb in a large place. Maybe if we get any main thought from this, it'll be from this phrase that I want you to carry home with you today. Sometimes we begin to chafe against the restrictions. As you grew up, especially when you were a teenager, no doubt at some point in time you thought, I don't like the rules. I don't like being told what to do. I don't like being told where to be. I don't like being told, with school, sit down and do this, sit down and do that, sit down and do this, go back to your seat, be quiet, don't talk, don't have fun, don't smile. I don't like being suffocated by all of these rules. I wish I could just go out and be free. Just let me be free. Mom and Dad won't let me drive. Well, yeah, you're 9, it's not going to go well. But if I could just be free, I know well enough. I'm smart enough. I'm 14. I'm 15, Dad. I'm a man now. Don't you know that I can just go out there and I can handle myself now? I'm tired of being in this fenced-in area. You bring me my feed and you set it here. You have this fence around me. But I don't need this fence to protect me. I can survive out there on my own. Do you see the picture I'm drawing for you here? He says, fine. I'm going to take that little lamb that is you, helpless, defenseless, without any knowledge of the dangers that are out there. And I'm going to set you out in the middle of a large place, the wilderness. Now you have infinite freedom. You can go as far as you want. You can stay up as long as you want. You can have that patch of grass over there, and you can have that patch of grass over there. You can go wherever you want. Isn't freedom great? By the way, if I were you, I'd hide at nighttime, because there's wolves, there's lions, and there's bears. By the way, there's wild dogs running around too. Oh, there's thieves as well who will find you and steal you and put you in their flock. By the way, there's briar bushes that you with your heavy wool can get stuck in. Oh yeah, by the way too, your wool is going to grow and it's going to get very heavy and it's going to get wet. And if somebody doesn't trim it for you, well, you're eventually going to fall over and you're just going to lay there and die. Go have fun with your freedom now. That's what he's saying in verse number 16. Israel's stubborn like a cow that doesn't want to go forward when you want it to. And so the Lord is going to feed you like a lamb in a large place, put you out in the wilderness. Now you have freedom, Israel. Go for it. Do what you want. But understand this, there are consequences. Before, you had a fence. That fence was restricting your freedoms, but it was protecting you and prolonging your life. The shepherd, man, he grabbed me by the neck with that stick of his and jerked me back in line. I don't like that. How dare you make me do something? Yeah, but you know what that shepherd did with that stick? He beat a few lions on the head too, which would have had you for dinner. Oh, I get the same thing every single day to eat. I am so tired of this feed. Oh, look at that fresh grass way over there. You know what? It may not have been exactly what you wanted to eat, but it was healthy for you. It made you grow strong and healthy, and it kept you safe. Sometimes we just want freedom. We just want to do what we please, but we're going to find out that that wasn't actually what we wanted after all. Sometimes children will grow up in church, and they'll hear from their youth pastor and from their junior church teachers and their Sunday school teachers, this, thou shalt do this and thou shalt not do that. And they'll hear from the preacher about morality and about what is right to do and what is wrong to do, and they'll chafe at it as they grow, and they'll think to themselves, you know what? One day, I'm not going to have to go to church. One day, I'm just going to work on Sundays, or I'm going to sleep in on Sundays, and I'm not going to have to go to church, and mom and dad won't be able to make me, and I'm going to find out what it's like to have freedom on Sundays and on Wednesday nights. And I'm not going to have to hand tracts out to anybody. Man, isn't it going to be wonderful? And they think that to themselves. And they'll find out. And it may take months or years or decades of their lives wasted, ruined, before they realize, if I had just stayed in the middle of the Lord's will, protected, warmed, cared for, encouraged, how much of this pain could I have spared myself? You know, to my kids, you know, if you get up in the morning and you know, they'll come in and jump in bed with us, and Colton reads from the Bible, and we pray, and then we send the oldest two off to go do their school. Man, if you guys did exactly that and went straight and got busy on school, never paused the class, never ran around and played with toys until you got caught, or skipped class. Man, if you just did exactly as you were told to do from the very first thing in the morning, well, you'd be done with school by like 1 o'clock, right? I mean, you'd be done early in the day and have so much time to play. Boy, mom would just have a huge weight lifted off of her shoulders. If we just decided that I'm going to do exactly what I'm supposed to do and live in obedience, life would be so much easier. Same thing with us. Man, if we just live in obedience, how much pain can we prevent? How much anxiety could we have prevented? How much less arguing and stress could we have prevented if we had just lived in obedience? You'll find out that doing what you want when you want is not what you wanted after all. And I'll stop there. Man, I really thought I was going to make it. I will eventually get through to chapter 4. And I'm already ready for chapter 5. I thought I was going to get there tonight, but I guess, like I said, I want to leave you with this thought this evening. Living in obedience is so much easier and more peaceful than doing it our own way. And God will put up the hedge of thorns first to slow you down. God will eventually remove His blessing and His provision, and at some point you'll find yourself face first in the mud like the prodigal son we talked about Sunday night. And you'll come to yourself, You'll finally leave the insanity, which is rebellion and selfishness, and you'll come to yourself and realize, what in the world am I doing to myself? Why couldn't I have just obeyed? I can't fix the past now, but I can change today and tomorrow, and now I will live in obedience. And my life does not have to be like this. I encourage you and leave you with that thought. And may the Lord, work on our hearts as He has mine with these thoughts. May the Lord work in the children's heart and anybody who's watching or listening to this throughout the week. Work in your heart concerning living in obedience. I pray that the Holy Spirit would convict where necessary, and that we would be sensitive to that conviction and be willing to make changes where necessary.